Hello YouTube, Canadian Edge here, and I'm going to do something a little different today. I am going to talk about knives for disabilities. And as a person who has a disability, I have muscular dystrophy. I find some knives easier to work with than others, so I'm just briefly going to go over that with you. I'll try and do it as quickly as I can. But we're going to go through a variety of different knives that I have and tell you which ones work best for me and which ones I find the most, maybe not difficult, but less easy to work with than others. And depending on if you're a person with disabilities, you might find other knives easier to operate than what I do. So you might not necessarily agree with my choices, but this is what works for me and what I find the easiest. So I'm gonna just move my camera a little bit there. All right, going to start off with knives that are easy for me to open. We got different ways of opening knives, of course. You've got like the Spyderco, some of the Benchmade knives. There are a few different companies that are copying the knife hole. And so that is one way of opening. Whoops, that's not one way of opening. But you can do the reverse flick and the thumb flick with the holes. I don't find them super easiest. I don't know, maybe I should have went from easiest to non-easiest. But anyway, we'll try and make sense of it. So there is the thumb holes that different knives have. And I have to be honest, if the pivot is good on them, I find doing the flick easier than doing the thumb sometimes, just because I tend to have a better grip on the knife this way. So if the knife does have a hole in it, doing the flick is often easier for me. But I do get cramps in my hands, so sometimes I have to be careful when opening a knife that I don't get a cramp at the same time, because that can prove bad. So that's one way of opening, and I do find that not too bad. I'm just going to set those to the side for a moment. And another type of knife is, I don't have a nail nick on here. This is just opening. This one's a two-hander. Unfortunately, got the Gerber. I don't get many knives that don't have either a thumb stud or the thumb holes or flipper and that on them, just because they're not necessarily that easy to open. You can do it one-handed, but not suggested. And so that is another type, but that type you're going to do usually with two hands. So I don't spend a lot of time with those knives. Other knives that I sometimes use, well, not sometimes, often use, they are going to have the flipper opening on them. So like the Civivi Altus, you have the flipper on that. This is one I've had for a while. It's a inexpensive one, and it doesn't have the thumb stud on it. Sorry, I said flipper opening. That's thumb stud. This has the thumb, what do they call that? Thumb screw on it, or thumb cap. So it's another method of opening, and the thumb stud in that. And I find the thumb studs usually are pretty good. Most knives, they're set up quite well, and I can use thumb studs quite easily. Also, let me see, the next one I guess would be the flipper opening. And so you've got different ones with flipper opening, and I have to be honest, for me, flipper opening is definitely the easiest. And so I tend to gravitate to a lot of the knives that do have the flipper opening on them. I just find flipper a lot easier to work with, and most knives are set up quite well that the flippers are quite easy to use. So I guess for me, flipper opening, or even like a button opening like the Kershaw, they are definitely the easiest for me to use. I have the most control of the knife with that type of opening, and so I tend to lean more towards flipper opening. Now, in terms of locking systems, I would say, starting off, my least favorite, and I'll go back to the Gerber and this Ruco knife, is the back lock. And I don't get many knives that have the back lock on them, just because I don't necessarily find them that great for me. They work fine. They're not that hard to do. I just don't really care for them, and it's not because of my disability. I find them easy enough to work with, just not favored in terms of the style of knife that I prefer. And then another one is the frame locks. And if you're familiar with frame lock, as opposed to liner lock, the frame lock is actually a part of the frame. And so the frame slides over and it locks the blade into place. And I don't mind the frame locks. These three knives actually, the frame locks are set up quite well, especially this one, where they are easy to use. But I have had a couple frame locks, and I gave them away to family and stuff like that, where the knife was a little bit smaller, and this one is close to that. I do find sometimes I push on the frame lock because I don't get a good grip otherwise, and so sometimes I find that I don't get the knife open as well as I should because I'm pushing on the frame lock. And it isn't the fault of the frame lock, it's just the way it's set up. You have to be careful not to be pushing on that with your fingers as you're trying to open the knife. So a frame lock with a little bigger body is easier for me, but again, I try not to get too many frame locks. This is probably the best one, but you do have the scale there, which you can push on, and the frame lock is quite narrow, so it isn't interfering. So that kind of thing works well for me, but I do find that some of the frame locks, I do have trouble with them because I am pressing down on the frame. And again, that's just my fault. Next in line, I guess, would be the liner locks. And how come I only grabbed, well, I got two here, I guess, with the liner lock. And so that is a separate bar that is a part of the framework that comes across, and so you have the scales on there that separate you from pressing on that, and so it makes it a little easier to operate. I have less problems operating that than I do some of the frame locks. So liner locks tend to work well because it is part of the liner, and they're out of the way. My biggest problem with liner locks is sometimes reaching them, because they make them flush, and as you can see, you kind of dent your thumbnail by using liner locks. So liner locks, I prefer them over frame locks, but again, not necessarily my top choice in terms of locks. My favorite lock, well, it's close. I would say not quite my favorite, but one lock that I really do like is the Axis lock, like on the Benchmades. Excuse me. I find that very easy to work with, and you can open and close, well, sometimes with the Axis lock. So I find the Axis lock quite easy to work with, and it's ones that I like better. And so some companies have copied, they call it different things, but similar idea in that they have a locking system like that, which does make it easier to lock or unlock your knife. So that would be, my second favorite choice would be the Axis lock, Axis style lock. And then my top choice, and I know they're kind of the rage right now, is the button lock. But I find the button locks super easy to work with, especially, left-handed. Fingers right there to push on the lock button. So I find them super easy to work with, and with my sometimes lack of ability, they work great. So it makes it easy for me to open and close knives. So lately I've been looking for knives that do have the button lock, that do appeal to me, and then I get those. So those are just some of the different things in terms of using knives with the disability. And I guess I should mention this as a button lock too. It's quite easy to work with. You just push it down, locks in place, push down, locks in place. So I find that one quite easy as well. But these are my favorite button locks. And so for me, the easiest knife to use is flipper with the button lock. And I didn't. The front flipper on some of them, I do have a couple of those. I didn't grab those, I should have. Front flipper is also another one. I don't necessarily find it that easy to use. Friend of mine, he finds it super easy, and I can do it, but it just, because of the awkwardness of it, I tend to stay away from front flipper knives as well. But I can do it. It's just not necessarily the easiest for me. So for me, having the back flipper is the easiest, and the button lock works the best. I can do either hand, and it doesn't take a lot of practice to use those two two forms of knives. So that is my favorite. So I'd be curious if anybody out there has any kind of disability and you also collect knives, what knives that you find easiest to use. As I say, you might disagree with me, and there's probably other knives out there that people like using. And so yeah, make sure you leave a comment telling me about what knives you prefer, even if you're not disabled, what knives you prefer. And I'd be glad to hear that. And so that is it for this. This is what I wanted to share. And hope that was helpful for some people, especially people that might be just getting into knives and they do have some disabilities with their hands, and they might find this useful information for them. So, all right, I'll be doing another knife review in a few days. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, leave me a comment. I will get back to you. And thanks for taking the time to watch. Appreciate everybody that does that. And so until next time, I will say stay safe and stay sharp.